Hello, I'm Natasha, a videographer in Buenos Aires. I'm here with James Billings, founder of Trust Heart. We are here to ask him a few questions about Trust Heart, to know a little bit about different types of trust and a little bit about the history. Pour ceux qui parlent en français, nous aurons une traduction de cette vidéo par écrit. Para los que hablan en español, tendremos una traducción escrita de ese video. So, James, how can I make my living trust more private?
Okay, this is it's kind of a sensitive topic, but the way that you make your living trust more private is very, very simple. And one of the problems with the living trust, it has to do with how you set them up, or maybe with your lawyer getting these things set up. They put them in the name of Jose Martinez or John Smith Living Trust, or the Smith Family Trust with John and Martha Smith as the trustees. Okay, so if you go look up a deed, you're going to see exactly who the people are. Okay, so one of the easiest way to do this, there is no restrictions on what you name a trust. It can be called the Bozo Trust. It can be called the Cardinal Trust. You can call it whatever you want. So for instance, on the Smith Family Trust, you can call it the Art Number 23 Trust, or whatever you want, or just anything you can think of. You can call your trust anything you want. It does not have to be the name of your family. So that's the one way you make it private. And then the second thing we do, all trusts need to have a real person as at some point to sign a document. So typically in the living trust, it's an individual, it's a natural person that's the trustee. So to make the name more private, what we do is that we'll use the surname or the last name of the individual, and then we'll only use the first initial. So in your case with Natasha, we would just use the letter N, period, and then your surname as the trustee. But we don't know if that's Natasha or Nathan, for instance. So it's gender ambiguous and it's incomplete. But the only person that really needs to know your full name is when you go to sell the property, for instance, on the real estate trust. That's what we would do, the first initial and then the surname. So who needs to see that? Well, it's when you come into the escrow process and to the title process, you have all of your identification, and your name, actually your full name, is in the trust paperwork that's private. Nobody ever sees that. But the public will just see your first initial. It's the same thing with the living trust. We do the same thing. So if you've got your house in your living trust, a lot of times it's got all the full information on it, but if you haven't done it or you want to do a new one, again, just make up any kind of name you want for the trust. Don't use the house address or house street. You make up something else. And then again, use your last name and then just use your first initial. And that all by itself will give you privacy, a lot more privacy than putting all of your details into the title.
Okay, and what does irrevocable mean?
Okay, irrevocable is another popular question we get. Okay, but all living trusts by default are revocable. That means when you set it up, you can cancel it. You can rip it up, you can tear it up. It's all canceled. So what's the opposite of that? If you want to make certain that it's permanent today, you just use the word irrevocable at the very beginning of it. That means you cannot revoke it. You cannot take it back. So it's like a one-way street. You cannot turn around and go back. And okay, so then the next sort of thought comes to be, well, why would you want to do an irrevocable? Well, think of somebody, maybe okay, mom is your mother, she's older, and she has one daughter that cares for her, and then she has a couple of sons that she has a little trouble with. And she owns a house, she's got a couple of $1 million worth of stuff, and she's concerned about the kids fighting, after she passes away, because she knows that she's older and, got some problems. So what she would do, she would write the trust irrevocable, and so the daughter is the trustee today. And then that way, by making it irrevocable, then it makes it much more difficult for the two sons to come back and fight later. And then also for the distribution that mom does, she says, okay, well, the daughter gets half of my stuff, and then my two sons only get a quarter each. Well, that way it would make it difficult for the sons to come back and say, no, we should all get a third. Okay, so that irrevocable, helps give you some additional strength in that manner. The other thing that happens with irrevocable is sometimes it's tax sensitive. When you have an estate that's more than $5.5 million, sometimes you have some tax issues that goes along with creating irrevocable trusts.
But with trust, do you have to pay tax?
Well, the taxes. Okay. Well, if it's a living trust and it's a estate plan. Okay, so mom passes away, so she's got $2 million worth of stuff. She got $1 million house. She's got $1 million in the brokerage account. Okay, the lifetime limit is $5.5 million, so there'd be no tax to the beneficiary. So, in the example of the daughter and the two sons, so she'd get $1 million, and then each of the two boys would each get $500,000. Okay, but none of them will pay any taxes on that. Okay, but like, if it was over the $5.5 million, yes, there'd be taxes that the state would have to pay, or it would get deducted from what the kids would get. Now, if you do a business trust, it's taxed differently, typically because it's in business. It wants to make a profit. So then it would pay income tax on its revenues, or excuse me, not on its revenues, but on its profit. So it's got its revenues, it's got its expenses, and that's what's left over, would be its pre-tax profit. So the business trust would pay income taxes. The living trust might pay estate taxes if it's a large estate. And then you have the realty land trust we talked about, and those are really more or less tax neutral because the beneficiaries of the real estate trust, husband and wife or a couple of business partners, if they made a profit when they sold the property, then that would come back to them personally. So then they would, they'd make a $100,000 gain each one of them, then they would pay the taxes individually, but not the trust. Because the trust in that particular situation is just for holding title.
Is the trust registered by the government?
The business trusts are modeled after mutual funds and real estate investment trusts. Okay, those type of trusts, those business trusts, those are registered because they're dealing with the public investor money. And so those are registered, and those are what we call statutory trusts, statutory business trusts. And so those, yes, those are registered with the government. But in the case of our living trust, no, it's not registered with the government. It's a private document. Nobody sees it except for you and later on your beneficiaries. It's always a good idea to share your living trust with your trustee or the people that are important to you. It's a sensitive topic with parents and their kids about money. But again, it's not registered. The real estate trust is not registered with the government either. Now, the trust does show up in the grant deed to the property, so it would have the name of the aviation trust number Roman numeral 23, and it would show the trustee, but it's not going to show anything else. So the actual trust document itself that has everything in it, the meat, if you will, that's private. Nobody sees that. So the business trust, the real estate trust, and the living trust. So typically, no, they don't. They're not recorded. They're not recorded like a deed. Nobody sees them, and again, they're not registered with the Secretary of State. At least the ones that we specialize in, which is in privacy, the private trust.
Well, thank you very much for answering all our questions. And if you have any other doubts or any question, you can visit the TrustHeart website. And see you in the next video.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.